Rain pounded against the weathered barn as lightning illuminated the desperate woman at Samuel's door. She was soaked to the bone, guitar case clutched to her chest like a lifeline. "Just one night," she pleaded over the howling wind. Samuel had no idea that opening his door would change everything, that this stranger with mud-caked boots would soon stand under blinding stage lights, telling millions about the farmer who saved her life and music. As her voice rose over the roar of the Madison Square Garden crowd 3 months later, Samuel watched from backstage, his calloused hands trembling as his name echoed through speakers, and the world suddenly knew who he was. Boo! Before we carry on, please hit the subscribe button to make my day, and let me know where you are watching from in the comments. The first drops of rain hit Samuel Carter's face as he squinted up at the darkening Oklahoma sky. His weathered hands tightened around the fence post he'd been replacing, the latest in a long list of repairs his struggling farm desperately needed. At 42, Samuel's face had become a roadmap of disappointment. Deep lines etched by years of drought, falling crop prices, and watching neighboring farms succumb to corporate buyouts one by one. "Should have listened to the forecast," he muttered, gathering his tools as the sporadic drops quickly transformed into a steady downpour. Thunder rumbled in the distance, confirming what the heavy air had been promising all afternoon. A serious storm was rolling in. Samuel jogged toward the shelter of his barn, boots squelching in the rapidly forming mud. The 100-acre property had been in his family for 4 generations, though it hardly resembled the thriving operation his grandfather had once proudly showcased in county fair photographs. Now, the peeling red paint of the barn stood as a sad reminder of better days, when the Carter family name meant something in Riverdale County. Inside the barn, Samuel shook the rain from his dark hair, now streaked with premature gray. The familiar sense of hay, motor oil, and damp earth enveloped him as he carefully arranged his tools on the workbench. The barn was his sanctuary, the one place he still felt a sense of purpose and control. Here, surrounded by the artifacts of his family's agricultural legacy, he could almost forget the mounting bills in the farmhouse, the letters from the bank with increasingly urgent red stamps. "Get it together, Sam," he said aloud, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. His border collie, Rusty, lifted his head from his napping spot on a bale of hay, ears perking up at his master's voice. Samuel had taken over the farm when his father died unexpectedly of a heart attack 8 years ago. The transition had been rough, leaving his job as an agricultural science teacher to return to his roots. He'd been a decent teacher but a middling farmer, lacking his father's intuitive understanding of the land and weather patterns. Pride had kept him from asking for help, from admitting that the family legacy might be too heavy a burden for his shoulders alone. As the rain intensified, drumming against the metal roof, Samuel's thoughts turned to dinner, likely another solitary affair with nothing but the evening news for company. His wife Laura had left 3 years prior, unable to accept the isolation and financial stress of farm life. Their divorce had been amicable but devastating, the final blow to the future he'd once envisioned. The distant sound of an engine struggling caught Samuel's attention. He moved to the barn door, squinting through the sheets of rain. A small car he didn't recognize was making its way up his long, muddy driveway, its wheels spinning in the increasingly treacherous conditions. "Who in their right mind?" he muttered, watching as the vehicle lurched forward before finally coming to a stop about 50 yards from the house. Curiosity and caution battled within him. Visitors were rare, especially on stormy evenings. The farm was well off the main highway, not the kind of place someone just happened upon. He whistled for Rusty, who bounded to his side, tail wagging with excitement at the prospect of a newcomer. Samuel watched as the driver's door opened and a figure emerged, immediately assaulted by the rain. The Persena woman. He realized pulled something large from the back seat before slamming the door shut with her hip. She hurried toward the farmhouse, hunched over whatever she was protecting from the deluge. With a sigh, Samuel stepped out into the rain. "Hey!" he called, waving his arms to get her attention. "Over here!" The woman changed course, rushing toward the relative shelter of the barn. As she drew closer, Samuel could see she was completely soaked, dark hair plastered to her face, clothes clinging to her slender frame. In her arms, she clutched what appeared to be a guitar case. "Thank you," she gasped as she entered the barn, water streaming from her clothes to form puddles on the concrete floor. "I'm so sorry to intrude. My GPS went haywire in the storm, and then my car started making these awful noises, and—" She broke off, catching her breath. Samuel nodded, taking in her appearance. She was younger than him, mid-30s perhaps, with striking features partially obscured by her dripping hair. Something about her seemed vaguely familiar, though he couldn't place why. Her clothes were simple jeans, boots, and a new-soaked denim jacket, but there was an undeniable presence about her that seemed out of place in his humble barn. "Roads around here can get tricky even in good weather," he said, reaching for a relatively clean shop towel from his workbench. "Here, for your—" He gestured vaguely at her face. "Thanks." She accepted the towel gratefully, wiping water from her eyes. "I'm Melody James. Samuel Carter," he replied, extending his hand. "Welcome to Carter Farm, though I doubt this is where you intended to end up." Melody's handshake was firm despite her obvious exhaustion. "Definitely not. I was trying to reach Riverdale. I have a meeting there tomorrow." Something in her tone suggested there was more to the story, but Samuel didn't press. "Well, you're close. About 15 miles east. But in this weather, it might as well be 100. He glanced toward the barn entrance, where rain continued to fall in sheets, punctuated by occasional flashes of lightning. "Weather service said this system's going to hang around all night." Melody set her guitar case down carefully, running her hand protectively over its surface to check for water damage. "I don't suppose there's a hotel nearby?" Samuel couldn't help the short laugh that escaped him. "Nothing closer than Riverdale itself, and I wouldn't recommend trying these back roads tonight. They flood quick." He hesitated, weighing his options. The proper thing would be to offer shelter, but the prospect of a stranger in his home, a female stranger at that, made him uneasy. It had been a long time since he'd entertained anyone. "Look," Melody said, seeming to sense his hesitation, "I'm really not a serial killer or anything. Just a musician with terrible planning skills and worse luck. I can sleep in my car if that's better, but... She glanced apprehensively at the intensifying storm outside. Samuel's ingrained hospitality finally overcame his reluctance. No, that won't be necessary. The farmhouse isn't much, but I've got a spare room. Used to be my office when I taught school." Relief washed over Melody's face. "I can't tell you how much I appreciate that. Just for tonight, I promise. I'll be out of your hair first thing in the morning. Let me grab something from the house for you to change into. You'll catch pneumonia in those wet clothes." Samuel whistled for Rusty, who had been curiously sniffing around Melody's boots. "Come on, boy. Is it okay if I leave my guitar here?" Melody asked, patting the case. "It's safer in the dry barn than out in that monsoon." Samuel nodded, feeling a twinge of curiosity about why a guitar would be her priority possession, but he kept his questions to himself as he ventured out into the downpour toward the farmhouse. 10 minutes later, they were both inside the modest 2-story farmhouse that had housed generations of Carters. Samuel had given Melody a pair of his ex-wife's sweatpants and an old university sweatshirt that Laura had left behind, along with a fresh towel for her hair. "Bathrooms upstairs, first door on the right," he said, gesturing toward the staircase. "There should be hot water, though the pipes sometimes make an ungodly racket." "Thanks. I won't be long," Melody replied with a grateful smile, disappearing up the stairs. While she showered, Samuel busied himself in the kitchen, assembling ingredients for a simple meal. It had been months since he'd cooked for anyone other than himself, and he found himself oddly nervous about the impromptu dinner. The best he could manage was soup from a can and grilled cheese sandwiches, but it would have to do. As he stirred the soup, his eyes drifted to the living room, where framed photographs chronicled his family's history with the land. Pictures of better times, his parents on their wedding day in front of the barn, himself as a child sitting proudly on his first tractor, the farm in its heyday when the fields stretched green and promising under summer skies. So much hope preserved behind glass, a stark contrast to the reality of his current situation. The sound of footsteps on the stairs pulled him from his reverie. Melody appeared, looking markedly better. Her dark hair hung in damp waves around her shoulders, and Laura's clothes hung loosely on her frame, but she appeared more comfortable. "Something smells good," she commented, hovering in the doorway as if uncertain of her welcome in the kitchen. "Nothing fancy, just soup and sandwiches." Samuel nodded toward the small table pushed against the wall. "Have a seat, it's almost ready." As they ate their simple meal, the initial awkwardness gradually gave way to cautious conversation. Samuel learned that Melody was indeed a musician, mostly working on smaller projects these days, as she put it, though she'd been fortunate enough to have some success in Nashville some years back. "What about you?" she asked, blowing on a spoonful of soup. "Have you always been a farmer?" Samuel shook his head. "I taught agricultural science at the high school in Riverdale for 12 years. Came back to take over the farm when my father passed. That must have been a difficult transition." He shrugged, uncomfortable with her perceptiveness. "It's family land. 4 generations. You do what you have to do." "And do you enjoy it? Farming?" The question caught him off guard. People rarely asked if he enjoyed it. They usually assumed farming was in his blood, a calling rather than a choice. "Some days," he answered honestly. "When things are growing well, when the weather cooperates, there's a satisfaction to it that's hard to explain." "And the other days?" Samuel met her gaze across the table, surprised by her interest. There was something about Melody that invited confidence, and attentiveness that made him want to give her honest answers rather than polite ones. "The other days I wonder if I'm the Carter who's going to lose it all," he admitted, immediately regretting his candor. "But that's not your problem. More soup?" Melody shook her head, seeming to understand his desire to change the subject. "I should probably turn in soon if I'm going to make it to Riverdale first thing tomorrow. Thank you again for dinner. And for not making me sleep in my car." "The spare room's nothing special," Samuel said, standing to clear their dishes. "But it's dry." After showing Melody to her room, Samuel retreated to the living room with a mug of coffee, listening to the storm rage outside. The rain beating against the windows provided a strangely comforting soundtrack as he reviewed the farm's depressing evening ritual that never yielded good news. The figures on the page confirmed what he already knew. Without a miracle, the bank would likely foreclose by the end of the year. 8 years of struggle, of pouring everything he had into the land, and it still wasn't enough. He closed the ledger with a heavy sigh, feeling the weight of 4 generations of Carters watching him from their photo frames. The floorboards creaked overhead as his unexpected guest settled in for the night. Samuel found himself wondering about Melody James, about what kind of music she played, and what had brought her to this remote part of Oklahoma. There was something distinctive about her, an air of quiet confidence beneath her bedraggled appearance that suggested she was accustomed to moving through the world on her own terms. With a final glance at tomorrow's grim weather forecast, Samuel turned off the lights and headed upstairs, Rusty padding faithfully at his heels. As he passed the guest room, he heard the soft melodic sounds of humming a haunting tune that followed him into his dreams of rain-soaked fields and faceless audiences applauding for someone he couldn't see. Morning arrived with unexpected brightness, the storm having spent its fury overnight. Samuel rose with the dawn, as was his habit, and made his way downstairs to start coffee before heading out for morning chores. To his surprise, he found Melody already in the kitchen, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, wearing yesterday's clothes, which had apparently dried overnight. "Hope you don't mind," she said, gesturing to the coffee pot. "I'm an early riser too." "Help yourself," Samuel replied, slightly disconcerted by the sight of someone else using his kitchen. It had been 3 years since Laura left. 3 years of solitary mornings. "Your land is beautiful in the morning light," Melody observed, glancing out the window where the sun was beginning to illuminate 2 covered fields. "You can't see much in the dark and rain, but now," Samuel followed her gaze. The storm had cleared the air, giving everything a freshly washed appearance that temporarily masked the farm's decline. From this distance, one couldn't see the broken fencing, the equipment in desperate need of repair, the fields that produced less each year despite his best efforts. "It's seen better days," he said, pouring himself a mug of coffee. "Mind if I look around a bit while you do your morning work? I'd like to see the barn in daylight. Promise not to get in your way." Samuel shrugged his agreement, surprised by her interest. Most people these days, especially city folks, didn't give much thought to where their food came from, let alone the struggling family farms that were increasingly rare in an era of industrial agriculture. After a quick breakfast, Samuel headed out to tend to his modest herd of cattle and check for storm damage. The previous night's deluge had left puddles across the property and washed out sections of the dirt access road. But thankfully, nothing catastrophic had occurred. The barn roof, which he'd patched just last month, had held firm. When he returned to the barn to grab a different set of tools, he found Melody sitting on a hay bale, her guitar removed from its case. Long, nimble fingers moved across the strings with practiced ease as she softly played a melody he didn't recognize. She was so absorbed in the music that she didn't notice his entrance immediately. Samuel stood quietly, not wanting to interrupt. There was something different about her this morning, a focused intensity that transformed her from a bedraggled traveler into someone commanding and assured. Her posture, the confident set of her shoulders, the way her head tilted slightly as she listened to the notes she produced all suggested someone intimately comfortable with her instrument. She struck a discordant note and paused, frowning slightly. "No, that's not right," she murmured to herself before trying a different progression. "Sounds pretty good to me," Samuel commented, finally announcing his presence. Melody looked up, slightly startled. "Sorry, I hope you don't mind. The acoustics in here are surprisingly nice." "Don't mind at all." Samuel moved toward his workbench, selecting the tools he needed. "You play professionally, you said?" "I have," she replied with a slight smile. "It's been a while since I've performed publicly, though. Been taking some time to reconnect with why I started playing in the first place." There was something in her tone, a hint of the larger story, but Samuel didn't press. Everyone was entitled to their privacy, and he of all people understood the desire to keep certain struggles to oneself. "How's your car this morning?" he asked, changing the subject. Melody grimaced. "Still making that terrible noise. Any chance there's a mechanic nearby? Pete's garage in Riverdale is honest, at least. I can give him a call if you'd like, though it might be a day or two before he can look at it." Samuel hesitated, calculating the impact of what he was about to offer on his already tight schedule. "In the meantime, I could drop you in town for your meeting. Need to pick up some supplies anyway." Relief washed over Melody's face. "That would be incredible. I really can't miss this appointment. It's important." An hour later, they were in Samuel's pickup truck, bumping down the long driveway toward the main road. Rusty sat between them on the bench seat, his head resting contentedly on Melody's lap as she absently scratched behind his ears. "He likes you," Samuel observed. "Usually takes him a while to warm up to strangers." "Dogs have always liked me," Melody replied with a smile. "More than people sometimes." They drove in comfortable silence for a while, the morning sun painting the Oklahoma landscape in golden hues. Rolling fields stretched to the horizon, punctuated by the occasional farmhouse or stand of trees. "Mind if I ask what your meeting's about?" Samuel finally inquired, curiosity getting the better of him. Melody seemed to weigh her response. "It's about a possible performance. A small venue in Riverdale reached out, wanting to book me for a show." "The Crossroads?" "That's the only music venue I know of around here." "That's the one," she confirmed. "Nothing fancy, but I'm trying to get back to my roots. Small venues, real people. Connection, you know?" End quote. Samuel nodded, though he wasn't entirely sure he did know. Music had always been peripheral to his life, something on the radio while he worked. Background noise at the county fair. The passion evident in Melody's voice when she spoke about performing was foreign to him. "Well, good luck with it," he offered as they approached the outskirts of Riverdale, a modest town that served as the commercial hub for the surrounding agricultural community. "Where can I drop you?" "The Crossroads is fine. I'm meeting the owner, Jack Reynolds." Samuel raised an eyebrow. "Jack? Known him since high school. Good guy." "Small world," Melody commented with a slight smile. When they pulled up in front of the weathered building that housed the Crossroads Bar Music Hall, Melody gathered her belongings, including her ever-present guitar case. "I can't thank you enough for everything, Samuel," she said earnestly. "You really saved me yesterday." "Don't mention it," he replied, suddenly awkward in the face of her gratitude. "Anyone would have done the same." Melody laughed softly. "We both know that's not true." She paused, seeming to make a decision. "Listen, I'll be in town for a few days. Would it be all right if I stop by the farm again before I leave? I'd love to see more of it in better weather." Surprised by the request, Samuel nodded. "Sure, I guess. Nothing much to see, but you're welcome anytime." As he watched her walk into the venue, guitar case in hand, shoulders squared with determination, Samuel couldn't help feeling there was something significant about Melody James that he was missing. She carried herself with a quiet dignity that seemed at odds with her current circumstances of broken-down cars and small-town venues. Shaking off the thought, he turned his attention to the errands that had brought him to town, trying not to dwell on the strange connection he felt with a woman he'd known for less than 24 hours. The Crossroads was nearly empty at this hour of the burl morning. The scarred wooden tables and worn stage waiting for the evening crowd. Jack Reynolds was behind the bar, tallying the previous night's receipts when the door opened, sending a shaft of sunlight across the floor. "We're closed until—" Jack began automatically before looking up. His eyes widened in recognition, and the pen he'd been holding clattered to the bar top. "Holy shit, you're really her." Melody approached with a small, practiced smile. "In the flesh. Thanks for agreeing to meet with me, Jack. When your manager called, I thought it was some kind of joke," Jack admitted, coming around the bar to shake her hand with barely contained excitement. "I mean, why would Melody James want to play my little dive bar? You've sold out Madison Square Garden, for crying out loud." Melody's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "As I'm sure Claire explained, I'm doing a series of small, unannounced shows. Getting back to my roots before my next album release." Jack nodded eagerly. "Stealth tour," she called it. "Building buzz, keeping it authentic. I get it. And don't worry, I've been sworn to secrecy. Just local musician Melody on the marquee, no last name, no photos allowed during the performance." "Perfect," Melody said, relaxing slightly. "I'd like to see the stage, if that's all right. Get a feel for the space." As Jack enthusiastically led her toward the small stage, chattering about the sound system and the usual crowd, Melody's thoughts drifted back to the weathered farmer who'd given her shelter. Samuel Carter had no idea who she was. That much had been immediately apparent. There had been no double takes, no barely concealed excitement, no carefully casual questions about her career. It had been refreshing, honestly, just being treated as a person, not a brand or a celebrity, or the subject of 1,000 tabloid stories about her. Mysterious disappearance from the music scene. "So how'd you end up in our neck of the woods a day early?" Jack asked as Melody tested the stage's acoustics by softly strumming a few chords. "Car trouble," she replied absently, more focused on the hollow spot she'd detected at center stage. "Got caught in the storm. Last night, a local farmer let me stay at his place." Jack's eyebrows shot up. "Around here? Anyone I know?" "Samuel Carter." Jack let out a low whistle. "Sam took in a stranger? That's unexpected. He keeps to himself these days. Has ever since Laura left him." Melody's hands stilled on the guitar strings. "His wife? Ex-wife now. Nice woman, but farm life wasn't for her. Especially once the financial trouble started." Jack leaned against the edge of the stage. "Sam's had a rough go of it. Came back to save the family farm when his dad died, but he's been fighting a losing battle. Shame, really. The Carters have been fixtures in this community for generations." Melody nodded thoughtfully, filing away this information. "He seemed resilient." Jack snorted. "That's one word for it. Stubborn as a mule might be another. Won't take help, won't admit he's drowning. Pride's gonna cost him that land." The conversation shifted to logistics for the upcoming show, but Melody found her thoughts repeatedly returning to the struggling farmer, with kind eyes and a quiet dignity that reminded her of her own father. Another proud man who'd worked the land until it broke him. Later, after finalizing details with Jack and checking into the small hotel in town, Melody sat on her bed with her songwriting journal open in front of her. Her pen hovered over a blank page as fragments of Melody's Tom and lyrics swirled in her mind, more ideas than she'd had in months. Something about the weathered red barn against the stormy sky, the determination in Samuel's stance even as he faced certain defeat, the generations of family photos watching over a kitchen where hope was running thin. It all coalesced into the beginnings of a song she'd been trying to write for her comeback album. A song about resilience, about roots, about the kind of authenticity she feared she'd lost somewhere between her third Grammy and her second world tour. With sudden clarity, Melody knew she needed to see more of Carter Farm, to understand the world that had shaped Samuel. There was a story there, a story that resonated with her own journey back to what mattered in music and in life. Picking up her phone, she dialed her manager's number. "Claire? It's me. I'm going to need a few more days in Riverdale. I think I've found my inspiration for the album's cornerstone track." 3 days later, Samuel was repairing a section of fence when the sound of tires on gravel announced a visitor. He straightened, shading his eyes against the midday sun, surprised to recognize Melody's now repaired car making its way up the driveway. Rusty bounded toward the vehicle, tail wagging furiously as Melody emerged. Looking markedly different from the bedraggled woman who'd arrived during the storm, her dark hair fell in styled waves around her shoulders, and she wore a simple but clearly expensive sundress with boots that, while practical for farm visiting, bore a designer label Samuel vaguely recognized from Laura's fashion magazines. "You came back," he stated unnecessarily, suddenly aware of his dirty work clothes and the sweat staining his cap. "I said I would," Melody replied with a warm smile. "Hope I'm not interrupting anything crucial." Samuel gestured to the fence post he'd been working on. "Nothing that can't wait. How'd your meeting go?" "Really well. I'm playing at the Crossroads tomorrow night." She paused, seeming slightly nervous. "I was hoping you might come. As my guest, of course." The invitation caught Samuel off guard. He couldn't remember the last time he'd gone to town for anything other than supplies or business. Social outings had fallen by the wayside as the farm situation deteriorated and his circle of friends dwindled. "I'd have to find someone to watch the place," he hedged. "Just for a few hours," Melody pressed gently. "Jack mentioned your neighbor Tony sometimes helps out?" Samuel raised an eyebrow. "You've been asking about me." A faint blush colored Melody's cheeks. "Just making conversation with a local business owner. Small towns, everyone knows everyone, right?" "That they do," Samuel agreed, though something in her explanation didn't quite ring true. "Tony could probably watch things for a night." "Perfect." Melody's smile widened. "But first, I was hoping for that tour of the farm you mentioned. I brought lunch." She held up a picnic basket that Samuel hadn't noticed before. "A thank you for rescuing me the other night." It had been years since anyone had shown this kind of interest in Samuel or his farm. Despite his instinct to protect himself from the inevitable questions about the farm's obvious decline, he found himself nodding. "Let me wash up first." Half an hour later, they sat on a checkered blanket beneath the sprawling oak tree that marked the farm's highest point, offering a panoramic view of the Carter property. Melody had brought an impressive spread artisanal sandwiches, fresh fruit, bakery cookies, and a bottle of sparkling water that now sat between them. "This is quite a setup," Samuel commented, biting into a sandwich that contained ingredients he couldn't readily identify but thoroughly enjoyed. "You didn't have to go to all this trouble." "It's nothing," Melody replied, her gaze sweeping across the landscape below. "Beautiful view from up here." Samuel followed her gaze, trying to see his land through fresh eyes. The afternoon sun cast a golden glow over the fields, some planted with crops in various stages of growth, others left fallow this season. The red barn stood as the property's anchor, surrounded by outbuildings in varying states of repair. In the distance, a small herd of cattle grazed lazily in a green pasture bordered by a creek that caught the sunlight like a silver ribbon. "It is beautiful," he agreed softly. Easy to forget that sometimes when you're just trying to keep it all from falling apart. Melody turned to him, her expression open and curious. "Tell me about it, the farm. Your family history here. Jack mentioned the Carters have been here for generations." Normally, Samuel avoided such conversations. The gap between the farm's storied past and its precarious present was too painful to dwell on. But there was something in Melody's genuine interest that loosened his usual reserve. "My great-grandfather established this place in 1922, he began, pointing toward the farmhouse. "Built that house with his own hands. Started with 40 acres and gradually expanded. My grandfather doubled the property during the post-war boom. By the time my father took over in the 70s, Carter Farm was one of the most successful operations in the county. And now it's yours," Melody observed. Samuel nodded, a familiar weight settling on his shoulders. "For better or worse? Mostly worse these days." "What happened?" The directness of her question might have offended him coming from someone else, but Melody's tone held no judgment, only curiosity and what seemed like genuine concern. "A perfect storm," Samuel answered after a moment. "Dad died suddenly, heart attack in the fields. I was teaching then, not prepared to take over a farm this size. Made some rookie mistakes that first year. Then came the drought of 2017, market teen. Prices tanked, equipment failures. He shrugged. "Each season I thought would be the turnaround, but it just kept getting worse. Now the bank's running out of patience." "I'm sorry," Melody said softly. "It must be hard watching something your family built slip away." "Hardest thing I've ever done," Samuel admitted, surprised by his own candor. "Not just because of the financial aspect, but because this land, it's more than property. It's my heritage, my identity in some ways. The Carters have always been caretakers of this piece of earth." Melody was silent for a moment, her gaze thoughtful as it roamed over the farm below them. "You know, where I come from, we have a saying, 'The land remembers those who tend it with love.' And where is that exactly? You never said." A brief shadow crossed her face. "A small town in Tennessee. Not so different from here, actually." "Is that where you learned to play?" Samuel asked, gesturing toward the guitar case she'd brought along on their picnic, just as she had everywhere else he'd seen her. Melody nodded, reaching for the instrument almost reflexively. "My father taught me my first chords when I was 6. Music was his escape from the hardships of a life not unlike yours. He was a farmer, a mill worker, but he understood struggle, sacrifice. Her fingers moved absently across the guitar strings, producing a soft, melancholy progression. "He used to say music was how the soul speaks, when words aren't enough." Samuel watched her hands, mesmerized by their fluid movement. "Would you play something? A real song, I mean." For a moment, Melody seemed uncertain, almost vulnerable. Then she straightened her shoulders and positioned the guitar properly in her lap. "This is something new I've been working on," she said, not meeting his eyes. "It's not finished yet." The melody that emerged was haunting and somehow familiar, though Samuel was certain he'd never heard it before. When Melody began to sing, her voice transformed, powerful yet intimate, with a raw emotional quality that seemed to reach directly into his chest and squeeze. The lyrics spoke of resilience against impossible odds, of holding on to family legacy when the world was changing too fast, of finding beauty in struggle and dignity in defeat. It was, Samuel realized with a jolt, a song that could have been written about him, about Carter Farm. When the final note faded into the afternoon air, Samuel found himself speechless, moved in a way he hadn't expected. He cleared his throat, trying to find appropriate words. "That was incredible," he managed finally. "You wrote that?" Melody nodded, looking slightly embarrassed by his reaction. "Just started it recently, actually." "You're too talented for small venues like the Crossroads," Samuel said, shaking his head in wonder. "You should be performing on bigger stages." A strange expression flickered across Melody's face, something between amusement and resignation. "Sometimes the smallest stages offer the most meaningful connections," she replied enigmatically. "Besides, I'm still figuring out what comes next for me, taking some time to rediscover my voice." Before Samuel could question her further, Melody changed the subject, asking about the different crops he grew, and the challenges of modern farming. The moment of unusual vulnerability passed, but Samuel found himself increasingly curious about his mysterious guest. As they packed up the remains of their picnic later, Samuel was struck by how comfortable he felt in Melody's presence, a stark contrast to the isolation that had characterized his life in recent years. There was an ease between them that defied their short acquaintance, as if they recognized something kindred in each other despite their apparently different lives. "So, I'll see you tomorrow night?" Melody asked as they walked back toward the farmhouse, the setting sun casting long shadows across the property. "I'll be there," Samuel promised, surprising himself with how much he was looking forward to it. After Melody drove away, Samuel stood on his porch, watching dust settle on the driveway. The property felt strangely empty now, the silence more noticeable than it had been before her arrival. With a sigh, he turned to call his neighbor about watching the farm the following evening, wondering what exactly he was getting himself into. The crossroads was packed when Samuel arrived the next evening, having to park farther down the street than he'd expected. He'd made an effort with his appearance. Wearing his one decent pair of jeans and a button-down shirt Laura had always said brought out the blue in his eyes. He felt awkward and out of place as he approached the entrance, where a small crowd had gathered despite it being a weeknight. "Sam Carter? As I live and breathe," Jack Reynolds boomed from the doorway, his face breaking into a grin of genuine surprise. "Didn't think I'd ever see you at one of my shows again." Samuel shook the offered hand, painfully aware of how long it had been since he'd socialized with old friends. "Special occasion," he replied with a small shrug. "Promised Melody I'd come." Jack's eyebrows rose slightly. "Right, your house guest. She mentioned you'd helped her out during the storm." He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Quite a gal, that one." There was something in Jack's tone, a hint of amusement or perhaps hidden knowledge that made Samuel curious. But before he could respond, Jack was pulling him inside. "Got you a table up front," Jack announced, guiding him through the surprisingly diverse crowd. Alongside the expected farmers and local townspeople were clusters of younger, hipper-looking individuals who seemed out of place in rural Oklahoma. Melody's request. The reserved table was indeed just in front of the small stage, which had been transformed with additional lighting and sound equipment that Samuel didn't remember from his infrequent past visits to the crossroads. "Quite a setup for a local show," Samuel observed as he settled into his seat. Jack snorted but didn't elaborate. "First beers on the house. Show starts in 20. Left alone at his table, Samuel glanced around, surprised by the buzz of anticipation in the room. Word about Melody must have spread quickly for this kind of turnout on a Tuesday night. He recognized many faces from town, but also noticed more than a few strangers, including a couple of men with professional-looking cameras who seemed to be trying to blend in unsuccessfully. "Samuel." A warm voice cut through his observations. He turned to find Melody approaching his table, looking transformed yet again. Gone were both the bedraggled traveler and the casual farm visitor. In their place stood a woman of unmistakable presence, dressed in a simple but elegant black dress, with boots that certainly hadn't been purchased at the local farm supply store. Her hair fell in loose curls around her shoulders, and subtle makeup accentuated her striking features. "You made it," she said, her smile genuine as she slid into the chair beside him. "I wasn't sure you would." "I said I would," Samuel replied, echoing her words from the previous day. "Though I didn't expect half the county to be here too." Melody glanced around, a flicker of concern crossing her face when she noticed the men with cameras. "Word travels fast in small towns." "That it does. But they're not all locals," Samuel observed. "Those guys with the cameras, for instance." Melody's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "Probably from the county paper or something," she said dismissively, though Samuel sensed there was more to it. "Listen, I can't stay and chat, need to warm up, but I wanted to make sure you were comfortable." "I'm fine," Samuel assured her, still puzzled by the unusual level of attention her performance seemed to be generating. "Break a leg. Or whatever it is you're supposed to say." Melody laughed, the sound warm and genuine. "Thanks. I hope you enjoy the show." She hesitated, then added more softly, "It means a lot that you're here." Before Samuel could respond, she was gone, weaving through the increasingly crowded venue toward the back area he assumed served as a green room. He watched her go, noting how people's eyes followed her movement, how conversations paused momentarily as she passed. There was an unmistakable energy around Melody, a magnetism that seemed at odds with her claim of performing in smaller venues these days. 20 minutes later, the house lights dimmed, and the crowd's chatter subsided to an expectant hush. Jack appeared briefly on stage to welcome everyone to a special night at the Crossroads before introducing a remarkable talent we're lucky to have with us tonight, Melody. The audience applauded enthusiastically as Melody took the stage, guitar in hand. She looked confident yet somehow vulnerable as she approached the microphone, her eyes briefly finding Samuel's in the front row before addressing the crowd. "Thank you all for coming out tonight," she said, her voice warm and intimate. "It's been a while since I've done this, and I can't think of a better place to find my way back to what matters." Without further introduction, she began to play a song Samuel didn't recognize but instantly connected with. Her voice filled the room, powerful yet controlled, conveying emotion with an authenticity that seemed to touch everyone present. The audience was rapt, utterly silent, except for occasional murmurs of appreciation during instrumental passages. As Melody moved through her set, Samuel found himself increasingly mesmerized. There was something transcendent about her performance, a raw connection between artist and audience that created an almost sacred atmosphere in the humble venue. He'd never been particularly moved by music before, but watching Melody perform, seeing the passion and vulnerability she poured into each song awakened something long dormant within him. It was during her fifth song that the realization began to dawn on him. The melody was vaguely familiar, something he might have heard on the radio years ago. And the way the crowd responded, singing along softly to the chorus. This wasn't just any traveling musician playing a small-town venue. The suspicion grew stronger when she introduced her next song with, "This one earned me my first Grammy, but tonight I'd like to play it the way I originally wrote it, before the producers got their hands on it." And a murmur ran through the crowd as Melody launched into an acoustic version of what Samuel now recognized as Harvest Moon Requiem, a hit song he'd heard countless times without ever connecting it to the woman who'd slept in his spare room. By the time Melody finished her set with the haunting, unfinished song she'd played for him during their picnic introduced, "A work in progress inspired by someone who reminded me why I make music in the first place," Samuel sat in stunned silence, piecing together the truth. Melody James wasn't just any musician. She was Melody James, the multiple Grammy winner, whose sudden retreat from the spotlight 2 years ago had generated endless media speculation. The woman who'd sold out arenas worldwide was the same person who'd appeared on his doorstep during a storm, who'd eaten soup at his kitchen table and asked about his crops with genuine interest. As thunderous applause filled the Crossroads, Samuel remained seated while others gave Melody a standing ovation. His mind raced, recalibrating every interaction they'd had, wondering if he'd been part of some elaborate publicity stunt or reality show. Melody took a final bow, her eyes finding him in the crowd. Something in her expression, a mixture of triumph, vulnerability, and what looked like apprehension, suggested she understood exactly what was going through his mind. After the show, Samuel waited at his table while Melody was surrounded by enthusiastic fans seeking autographs and photos. The men with cameras were now openly taking pictures, and he heard snippets of conversations that confirmed his suspicions. People excitedly discussing how they'd been at Melody James's secret comeback show and speculating about her next album. It was nearly an hour before the crowd thinned enough for Melody to make her way to his table, her expression a mixture of exhilaration from the performance and anxiety about his reaction. "So," Samuel said simply, as she slid into the chair across from him. "Melody James." She winced slightly at his tone. "I should have told you. Were you ever going to?" Melody sighed, running a hand through her hair, surprisingly vulnerable gesture from someone who had commanded the room so completely just an hour before. "Yes, tomorrow, actually. I wanted you to see me perform first, to understand that part of me before the whole famous musician thing complicated everything." Samuel processed this, trying to reconcile the international star with the woman who'd seemed so at ease sitting under his oak tree. Why all the secrecy? And why me, my farm? The secrecy wasn't about you specifically, Melody explained, leaning forward earnestly. I've been off the grid for almost 2 years, trying to find my voice again after everything became about record sales and stadium shows and media coverage. She gestured vaguely around the now emptying venue. This tour, small venues, no publicity, just showing up and playing. It's my way back to what matters in music. And my farm? Was that just convenient shelter during a storm, or something more? Melody's expression softened. The storm was genuine bad luck or good luck, depending on how you look at it. But once I was there, once I saw the farm, heard your story, something clicked, Samuel. Your struggle, your connection to the land, your quiet determination in the face of likely defeat resonated with me in a way nothing has in years. Samuel sat back, still processing the revelation. So, I'm what? Inspiration for your comeback album? He immediately regretted the bitterness in his tone when hurt flashed across Melody's face. That's not fair, she said quietly. Yes, meeting you sparked something creatively, but it was never just about that. I genuinely enjoyed our conversations, our time together. She paused, seeming to choose her words carefully. When you've been in the spotlight as long as I have, it's rare to meet someone who sees you as a person first, not a celebrity or a meal ticket. You gave me that, even if only for a few days. The sincerity in her voice made it difficult for Samuel to maintain his indignation. Still, he couldn't help feeling somewhat used, however unintentionally. I should have recognized you, he said finally, shaking his head. Laura used to play your music all the time. A smile ghosted across Melody's lips. Most people see what they expect to see. You weren't looking for a Grammy-winning artist on your doorstep during a thunderstorm. No, I certainly wasn't. Samuel sighed, the initial shock beginning to fade. So, what happens now? You go back to your real life, and I go back to losing my farm? The harshness of this question hung between them for a moment before Melody responded. My real life isn't what you might think, she said quietly, and I'm not quite ready to leave just yet, if that's okay. She hesitated, then added, I meant what I said about the song being inspired by you and your farm. I'd like to finish it properly, maybe even record some of it there if you're willing. Samuel raised an eyebrow. You want to record at Carter Farm? Just some acoustic work, nothing elaborate. There's something about that old barn's acoustics. Melody trailed off, studying his face. Unless you'd rather I didn't. The thought of refusing her request seemed absurd, even in his confused state. No, it's fine. It's just surreal, I guess. Melody laughed softly, the tension between them easing slightly. Trust me, I understand surreal. My life has been a series of surreal moments for the past decade. She reached across the table, briefly touching his hand. For what it's worth, these past few days just being Samuel's unexpected houseguest, not Melody James, have been the most normal I've felt in years. Something in her expression, a mixture of hope and hesitation, made Samuel's remaining anger difficult to maintain. Whatever her reasons for keeping her identity secret, he couldn't deny the connection he'd felt during their brief acquaintance. All right, he said finally. You can record in the barn, but no more secrets, okay? End quote. Relief washed over Melody's face. No more secrets, she agreed. In fact, I'd like to tell you the full story about why I disappeared from music, why this comeback matters so much. But not here. She glanced around at the few remaining patrons, some of whom were clearly eavesdropping. Tomorrow? Samuel nodded, still somewhat dazed by the evening's revelations. Tomorrow. As they parted ways outside the crossroads, Melody to her hotel, and Samuel to his truck, he couldn't help wondering what other surprises awaited him in this unexpected bereft. Relationship with a woman whose music had apparently touched millions, but whose real self remained a mystery to most of the world. Samuel woke early the next morning, as was his habit, but found his usual routine disrupted by thoughts of the previous night's revelation. As he moved through his morning chores, tending to the animals and checking irrigation systems, his mind kept returning to Melody's performance, the The power of her voice, the way she had commanded the room, the undeniable talent that had propelled her to fame. It made their previous interactions seem almost absurd in retrospect. A multiple Grammy winner sitting on his weathered porch, eating soup from his chipped bowls, asking about crop rotation as if genuinely interested. By mid-morning, Samuel had worked himself into a state of conflicted anticipation about Melody's promised visit. Part of him was still uncomfortable with having been kept in the dark about her identity, while another part was simply curious about what further revelations the day might bring. The sound of tires on gravel announced her arrival shortly before noon. Samuel emerged from the barn to find not just Kane, Melody's car, but a small, unmarked van as well, from which two men were unloading what appeared to be recording equipment. "Hope you don't mind," Melody called as she approached, looking more like the casual farm visitor from days ago than the polished performer of the previous night. "This is Dave and Ryan, my sound engineers. They're going to help set up for the recording session." Samuel shook hands with the men, both of whom regarded the weathered barn with professional interest rather than the judgment he might have expected for his rundown property. "The acoustics in there are killer," Dave commented, nodding toward the barn. Melody wasn't exaggerating. "We'll keep the setup minimal," Ryan assured Samuel, perhaps sensing his apprehension. "Just enough to capture the natural sound of the space." As the engineers began their work, Melody drew Samuel aside, toward the farmhouse. "I promised you the full story," she reminded him, "and I always keep my promises. Eventually." Inside, over coffee at the kitchen table where they'd shared their first meal, Melody revealed the journey that had brought her to his doorstep. She spoke of her meteoric rise to fame after being discovered at a small Nashville club, of the whirlwind years of touring and recording that followed, of the gradual feeling that she was losing herself in the machinery of the music industry. "2 years ago I hit a wall," she explained, her hands wrapped around her mug. "Creatively, emotionally. I couldn't write, couldn't connect with audiences anymore. Everything felt hollow. So, I did what the industry considers career suicide. I canceled the remainder of my world tour, went into seclusion, and told my label I wouldn't return until I had something real to say again." "And did you find something real?" Samuel asked. Melody's gaze met his, steady and certain. "I'm starting to. Being here, seeing your connection to this land despite everything working against you, it reminded me of why I started making music in the first place. Not for fame or fortune, but because I had something I needed to express, something I believed mattered." Samuel absorbed this, struck by the parallel between their situations, both fighting to preserve something precious against increasingly difficult odds, both questioning whether the struggle was worth it. "The song you're working on, the one you played at the picnic and again last night," he said slowly. "It's about the farm, isn't it? About me?" Melody nodded. "It started that way, inspired by your story, by what I saw here. But it's become something more. It's about resilience, about holding on to what matters even when the world tells you to let go." She hesitated, then added, "It's called Weathered Red for the barn. And you want to record it here." "Not just record, I want it to be the lead single for my comeback album." Melody leaned forward, her expression animated in a way Samuel hadn't seen before. "Samuel, this song could be important not just for me, but for people like you all across the country who are fighting to preserve a way of life that's disappearing." The passion in her voice was compelling, but Samuel sensed there was more to her proposal than artistic integrity. "And what does that mean for me, practically speaking?" Melody took a deep breath. "I'd like your permission to film part of the music video here as well. Nothing invasive, just me, the barn, maybe some of the landscape. But I also want to tell your story alongside the song, if you're comfortable with that. The reality of family farms in America, the struggles you face, the importance of what you're fighting to preserve." Samuel sat back, stunned by the unexpected turn the conversation had taken. "You want to use my failing farm as some kind of statement?" "Statement. Not as a statement, as a truth that needs to be told," Melody corrected gently. "Samuel, people in cities, in the music industry, in entertainment, they have no idea what's happening in places like this. They don't understand what's being lost as family farms disappear. She reached across the table, briefly touching his hand. Your story matters. And I have a platform that could help people hear it. The prospect was both appealing and terrifying. Samuel had never sought attention, had bored his struggles privately in the tradition of the Carter men before him. But the idea that his farm, his family's legacy, might have meaning beyond his own attachment to, it might even help others in similar situations was a perspective he hadn't considered. I need to think about it, he said finally. Melody nodded, immediately respectful of his hesitation. Of course, take all the time you need. She stood, gathering her empty mug. Meanwhile, if it's still okay, we'll get started on the audio recording. Just me and the guitar in the barn, nothing you need to be part of unless you want to be. As Melody left to join her sound engineers, Samuel remained at the kitchen table, surrounded by the faded photographs of Carter generations past. What would his father think of this unexpected development? His grandfather? Would they see it as exploitation or opportunity? As surrender or a new kind of fight for the land? Eventually, Samuel rose and made his way to the barn, drawn by the sound of Melody's voice floating through the air. He paused in the doorway, watching unnoticed as she performed Weathered Red for the recording equipment now set up in his barn. In that moment, seeing her completely immersed in creating something beautiful from the very struggle that had dominated his life, Samuel began to understand that perhaps he had something to offer after all, not just land and hospitality, but a story worth telling, a perspective worth sharing. And maybe, just maybe, this unexpected collision of their worlds might be the saving grace they both needed. Over the next week, Carter Farm transformed into a hub of creative activity unlike anything in its long history. Melody and her small team, which remained just the two sound engineers, and, later, a videographer, established a makeshift studio in the barn, capturing both the song and visuals that would accompany it. Samuel, after much consideration, had agreed to Melody's proposal, with the condition that any portrayal of the farm would be honest, neither romanticized nor pitied, but shown in its complex reality. To his surprise, Melody had embraced this approach wholeheartedly. That's exactly what I want, she'd assured him. Authenticity is what's been missing from my music, from the whole industry. No glossy filters, no manufactured narratives. True to her word, the filming process had been respectful and unobtrusive. The videographer, a thoughtful woman named Elena, had documented the everyday rhythms of farm life, Samuel repairing equipment at dawn, tending to animals, checking crops with worried eyes as he calculated yields against expenses. They captured the beauty of the land at different times of day, the weathered dignity of buildings that had stood for generations, the small moments of connection between a man and the place that defined him. Throughout it all, Samuel found himself gradually relaxing into this strange new reality. There was something cathartic about seeing his daily struggles through the lens of Melody's artistic vision, transformed not into something artificial, but into something meaningful beyond his own experience. More surprisingly, he found himself enjoying Melody's continued presence. They fell into an easy routine. She would record during the day while he worked the farm. Then in the evenings they would often share meals and conversation on the porch, watching the sunset paint the fields in golden light. Do you think you'll be able to save it? Melody asked one such evening, the question she'd clearly been holding back finally emerging. The farm, I mean. Samuel sighed, considering the brutal honesty with which he'd been forced to confront his situation recently. Probably not, he admitted, the words less painful than they would have been weeks ago. At least, not in its current form. The numbers just don't work anymore for operations this size. Melody nodded, absorbing this. What will you do? I've been thinking about that more lately, Samuel replied, surprising himself with the admission. Maybe scale down. Focus on specialty crops, rather than competing with the big operations. There's a growing market for organic, locally grown produce. He gestured toward the fields. Or maybe convert part of the land for educational purposes, farm visits for schools, that kind of thing. Use my teaching background. You've given this serious thought, Melody observed with a small smile. Having to explain my situation to your camera crew Forced me to articulate things I've been avoiding, Samuel acknowledged. Made me realize I've been so focused on not losing everything that I haven't considered what saving part of it might look like. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the twilight deepening around them. What about you? Samuel asked eventually. After this song is released, then what? Melody's expression grew thoughtful. The album will follow, then a proper tour, but not like before. Smaller venues, more intimate shows. I'm done with stadiums where I can't even see the faces in the crowd. She turned to him, her expression earnest. This experience meeting you, being here, it's changed my perspective on what success really means. I want my music to matter, not just sell. Samuel nodded, understanding the parallel in their journeys. Both were being forced to reimagine what fulfillment looked like when original dreams became untenable. When do you leave? He asked, the question that had been hovering unspoken between them for days. Tomorrow, Melody replied softly. We've got everything we need for the song and video. I need to get back to Nashville to finish production. She hesitated, then added, but that's not the end, Samuel. When the video releases, there will be interest in your story, in the farm. My team wants to coordinate with you on that, interviews, press opportunities. Samuel grimaced slightly. Not really my thing. I know, Melody acknowledged with a small laugh. But he could help with whatever direction you decide to take the farm. Visibility has value these days. As darkness fell completely, Samuel realized how quickly he'd grown accustomed to these conversations, to Melody's presence in his previously solitary life. The thought of returning to the silence after she left was unexpectedly difficult. I'll miss this, he admitted, gesturing vaguely between them. The talks. In the dim porch light, Melody's expression softened. Me too. She hesitated, then reached over to place her hand over his. You know, Nashville isn't that far from Oklahoma, and I'll need to come back when the video releases. Samuel turned his hand to clasp hers, a silent acknowledgement of the connection that had formed between them. Fragile, yet significant, complicated by their different worlds yet grounded in mutual understanding and respect. The next morning, as Melody and her team packed up their equipment, Samuel found himself fighting an unfamiliar emotional tightness in his chest. Standing beside her car, he felt awkward suddenly, unsure of the proper farewell for whatever their relationship had become. Thank you, Melody said simply, breaking the silence. For trusting me with your story, your space. She gestured toward the farm around them. This place is special, Samuel. So are you. Just an ordinary farmer, he demurred. Melody shook her head, a fond exasperation in her expression. After everything, you still don't see it. She stepped closer, her voice lowering. There's nothing ordinary about fighting for what matters, about pouring your heart into something despite impossible odds. That's what connected me to you from the beginning. I recognized a fellow stubborn soul. Before Samuel could respond, she reached up and kissed his cheek, her hand briefly resting against his heart. This isn't goodbye, she promised. Just intermission. As her car disappeared down the long driveway, Samuel stood watching until the dust settled, Rusty sitting loyally at his feet. The farm seemed strangely empty, the silence both familiar and newly uncomfortable. With a deep breath, he turned back toward the barn weathered red against the blue Oklahoma sky, now imbued with new meaning through Melody's eyes and voice. For the first time in years, he felt a flutter of something that resembled hope. Not for the impossible salvation of everything he'd known, but for the possibility of something new growing from deep, resilient roots. 3 months passed in a blur of seasons changing and preparations being made. Samuel had initially returned to his solitary routine after Melody's departure, but their continued communication regular. Phone calls and text messages, updating each other on their respective projects had kept the connection alive across the distance. Melody had sent him rough cuts of both the song and video as they developed, seeking his input in a way that made him feel genuinely valued rather than merely consulted as a courtesy. The final versions, which she'd shared just a week ago, had left him speechless, seeing his daily life, his struggles and small triumphs, interwoven with her powerful music, created something more profound than he anticipated. It releases next Monday, Melody had told him during their last call. And I want you to be there for it, Samuel, in New York. The invitation had seemed absurd at first. Samuel Carter at a major music industry event in Manhattan? But Melody had been insistent. This is as much your story as mine. You should be part of its introduction to the world. Which explained why Samuel now found himself in an unfamiliar suit, standing backstage at Madison Square Garden, watching a crowd of thousands eagerly awaiting Melody's first public performance in nearly 2 years. The past 3 days had been a whirlwind of flights, luxury hotel rooms, media appearances where he'd been introduced as Cref. The inspiration behind Melody James's triumphant return to music, and crash courses in industry etiquette from Melody's endlessly patient manager, Claire. Nervous? Claire asked now, appearing beside him with her ever-present tablet in hand. You're up in about 10 minutes. Samuel tugged at his collar, feeling out of place despite everyone's efforts to make him comfortable. Terrified might be more accurate. Claire smiled sympathetically. Just remember what Melody told you: be yourself. That's who she wants out there, not some polished version. On stage, the opening act was concluding to enthusiastic applause. Backstage became a flurry of activity as technicians prepared for the main event, Melody's band members adjusting instruments and checking equipment. And then she was there beside him, transformed once again into the star she was tiled for the spotlight, but with the same warm eyes that had connected with his across his kitchen table. Ready for this? She asked, taking his hands in hers. Not remotely, Samuel admitted with a shaky laugh. I'm a farmer, Melody, not a public speaker. You're much more than just a farmer, she corrected gently. You're the heart of this psalm, this moment. She squeezed his hands. Just tell them what you told me that day under the oak tree about legacy, about connection to the land. The words will come. Before he could respond, she was being called to her position. With a final reassuring smile, she disappeared into the organized chaos of backstage. Moments later, the arena darkened completely. Then a single spotlight illuminated Melody at center stage. The crowd's roar was deafening, the energy palpable even backstage where Samuel watched on a monitor. It's been a while, Melody said into the microphone, her voice steady despite the enormity of the moment. I've missed you. Another wave of cheers washed through the arena. 2 years ago, I walked away because I'd lost my way. Lost the reason I started making music in the first place. Melody paused, her expression serious. I needed to find something real again, something that mattered beyond sales and charts and hashtags. The audience listened in rapt attention as she continued. And then, during a storm in Oklahoma, I found myself stranded on a family farm that's been fighting for survival against impossible odds. I met a man who taught me more about courage and perseverance in a few days that I'd learned in a decade of success. She smiled slightly. He didn't know who I was, at first just offered shelter to a stranger with a guitar. And in that simple act of kindness, in his story, I found my voice again. Samuel's heart hammered in his chest as Melody gestured toward the side of the stage. I want to introduce you to Samuel Carter, whose family has worked the same land for 4 generations, whose struggle inspired the psalm I'm about to play for the first time publicly. She extended her hand. Samuel, would you come out here? Claire gave him a gentle push, and suddenly Samuel was walking onto the stage of Madison Square Garden, blinking in the bright lights, aware of thousands of eyes on him. Melody's hand found his, steady and reassuring, as she guided him to the center spot. Samuel's going to tell you a little about his farm before we play the song, Melody explained to the audience, then turned to him expectantly. For a terrifying moment, Samuel thought he might be unable to speak. But then, looking at Melody, he remembered their conversations, the genuine connection that had formed between them, and found his voice. I'm not used to stages like this, he began honestly, eliciting a warm laugh from the crowd. My usual audience is about 30 head of cattle who are decidedly less enthusiastic. More laughter, easing his nerves slightly. The Carter farm has been in my family since 1922, he continued, finding strength in speaking about what he knew best. "My great-grandfather built the barn that you'll see in Melody's video with his own hands. It's weathered storms, droughts, economic depressions, and everything else a century can throw at a place." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "Family farms like mine are disappearing across America. Each one that goes takes with it generations of knowledge, tradition, connection to the land. It's not just about growing food, it's about stewardship, about understanding that we belong to the earth more than it belongs to us." End quote. The arena was silent now, thousands of people listening to a farmer from Oklahoma with an intensity he'd never experienced. "When Melody showed up at my door during that storm, I had no idea who she was, just someone needing shelter." Samuel glanced at her, finding encouragement in her smile. "But over the days that followed, as she asked about the farm, about my family's history there, I began to understand that maybe our story mattered beyond our own fences. That even in struggle, especially in struggle, there's meaning worth sharing." Ah! He took a deep breath, preparing to conclude. "I don't know what the future holds for Carter Farm. The challenges facing family agriculture are enormous. But I do know that because of Melody, whatever happens next, our story won't be forgotten. And sometimes being heard, being seen in your struggle, is its own kind of victory." End quote. The applause that followed surprised him with its intensity, not polite acknowledgement, but genuine appreciation that washed over him in waves. Melody squeezed his hand before guiding him to a seat at the side of the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, returning to the microphone as her band took their positions, "this is Weathered Red." The opening notes of the now familiar melody filled the arena, but hearing it performed live with full band arrangement was a revelation. The song had evolved since those first acoustic versions in his barn, growing in power and nuance while retaining the emotional core that had moved him from the beginning. As Melody sang of resilience against impossible odds, of hands shaped by work and hearts shaped by loss, of barns standing red against prairie skies, despite everything working to tear them down, images appeared on massive screens behind her Samuel's farm in all its weathered glory, his hands working the soil. The Carter family photograph spanning generations. The final verse transitioned from specific to universal, connecting his story to countless others across the country. The makers, the growers, the stewards fighting to preserve something authentic in a world increasingly detached, quote, from its roots. When the final note faded, there was a moment of complete silence before the arena erupted. Samuel found himself standing with the rest of the audience, moved beyond words by the power of seeing his daily reality transformed into art that resonated with thousands of strangers. Melody's eyes found his across the stage, bright with emotion and triumph. In that moment, something unspoken passed between them, an acknowledgement that this unlikely partnership had created something larger than either could have achieved alone. Later that night, at the reception following the performance, Samuel found himself surrounded by industry executives, music journalists, and celebrities whose names he vaguely recognized, all eager to hear more about the farm, about his perspective on agricultural sustainability, about the experience of inspiring Melody's comeback. "Hanging in there?" Melody asked, appearing at his side with 2 glasses of champagne, one of which she offered to him. "Barely," Samuel admitted, accepting the drink gratefully. "Your world is exhausting." Melody laughed, the sound genuine and relaxed in a way he hadn't heard before tonight. "It is. But it's also exhilarating when it's connected to something real." She clinked her glass against his. "To weathered red barns and the stubborn people who keep them standing. And to Grammy-winning musicians who find inspiration in unlikely places," Samuel added with a smile. "About that," Melody said, her expression turning slightly more serious. "We need to talk about what happens next." Samuel raised an eyebrow. "I assumed I go back to my cows, and you continue your triumphant comeback tour." "That's certainly one option," Melody acknowledged. "But there are others we should discuss." She glanced around at the crowded reception. "Not here, though. Tomorrow?" Before Samuel could respond, they were interrupted by Claire, who needed to introduce Melody to an important radio programmer. With an apologetic smile, Melody was swept away into the crowd, leaving Samuel to wonder what possibilities she had in mind. The following morning, Samuel awoke in his luxury hotel room, still marveling at how dramatically his life had changed in the span of 3 months. From the brink of foreclosure to sitting on a Manhattan balcony, 20 stories above the streets, watching the city come alive while sipping coffee that cost more than he'd usually spend on breakfast for a week. A knock at his door announced Melody's arrival. She entered looking refreshed and relaxed in simple jeans and a sweater, so different from her stage persona of the previous night, yet equally captivating in her authenticity. "Sleep well?" she asked, joining him on the balcony and accepting the cup of coffee he offered. "Better than I expected," Samuel admitted, "though I'm still not entirely convinced this isn't all some elaborate dream." Melody smiled, understanding in her eyes. "It's a lot to take in. But we should talk about the real-world implications while we have the chance." "What implications?" "Wuthered. Red is being released to radio and streaming platforms today," Melody explained. "Based on the industry response last night and the pre-release buzz, my label expects it to be significant. The video goes live at noon." Samuel nodded, still struggling to grasp how his daily life had become content for mass consumption. "And that affects me how? Exactly?" "There will be interest in you, in the farm." Melody set her cup down, her expression serious. "Media requests, probably some offers for appearances, definitely social media attention. Claire has already fielded calls from 3 major morning shows and several magazines wanting to interview you." Samuel felt a wave of anxiety at the prospect. "That's not really my thing, Melody. I'm happy to have helped inspire your comeback, but I'm not looking for fame." "I understand that," she assured him quickly. "And you can decline anything that makes you uncomfortable. But there's potential here that goes beyond publicity." She leaned forward, her passion for the subject evident. "The response last night wasn't just about the music, Samuel. People connected with your story, with the issues facing family farms like yours. Because you made it beautiful through your song," Samuel pointed out. "Real life on the farm is mostly hard work and worry, not poetic moments at sunset." Melody acknowledged this with a nod. "True, but beauty helps people pay attention to difficult realities they might otherwise ignore. And now that they're paying attention, there are opportunities." "What kind of opportunities?" "Several, actually." Melody shifted to face him more directly. "First, there's a foundation interested in partnering with you to establish an educational program at Carter Farm bringing students to learn about sustainable agriculture. Traditional farming methods, the history of family farms in America. They were at the show last night, and your comments about stewardship really resonated." Samuel raised his eyebrows, surprised. "Teaching again? On the farm?" "Combining your backgrounds," Melody confirmed. "They provide funding for necessary renovations and programming development. It wouldn't save the entire farm as a commercial operation, but it would preserve the heart of it, keep it in your family, and create something meaningful from the struggle." End quote. Samuel sat back, considering this unexpected possibility. The idea of sharing his family's agricultural knowledge, of helping young people connect with the land in an increasingly digital world. It appealed to the teacher in him that had never fully disappeared. "There's more," Melody continued. "A collective of organic food companies is interested in contracting a portion of your acreage for specialty crops heritage varieties. Organically grown. It would be a smaller operation than what you've been running, but potentially more profitable per acre." End quote. "How do you know all this?" Samuel asked, amazed at the developments that had apparently occurred overnight. Melody smiled slightly. "Claire's been fielding inquiries since the story of our connection first leaked to the music press. Last night just accelerated everything." She hesitated, then added, "And I may have been making some calls myself over the past few months." "You've been planning this," Samuel realized, not sure whether to feel manipulated or touched by her efforts. "Not planning exactly," Melody clarified. "But I recognized a potential in your situation from the beginning, not just for my music, but for you, for the farm." I wanted to make sure there were real options available if the song and video resonated the chess way I thought they would. Samuel stood, moving to the balcony railing to look out over the city, trying to process everything. The prospect of transforming Carter Farm rather than losing it entirely was appealing, especially if it meant preserving his family's connection to the land while adapting to new realities. "And what about you in all this?" he asked finally, turning back to face her. "Where do you fit into these potential futures for Carter Farm?" Melody's expression softened, a vulnerability appearing that he'd rarely seen. "That depends partly on you, Samuel." "On me?" She joined him at the railing, close enough that he could detect the light scent of her perfume. "These past months, our conversations, the connection we've formed, they've meant a lot to me." She met his gaze directly. "More than I expected when I showed up at your door during that storm." Samuel felt his heart rate increase, suddenly very aware of her proximity. "They've meant a lot to me too," he admitted quietly. "The truth is," Melody continued, "I don't want this to be the end of our story. Whatever form Carter Farm takes going forward, I'd like to be part of it somehow." She smiled, a touch of nervousness visible despite her usual confidence. "I bought a small place outside Nashville last year, a retreat from the music industry chaos. But I'm finding I miss Oklahoma more than I expected." The implication hung between them, neither quite ready to articulate it directly, but both aware of its presence. "Nashville's not that far from Oklahoma," Samuel said finally, echoing her words from their parting 3 months ago. "No," Melody agreed softly. "It's not." Their conversation was interrupted by the ringing of Melody's phone Claire, reminding them of the video release happening in an hour and the scheduled interviews that would follow. "We have time to figure out the details," Melody said, as they prepared to leave the peaceful sanctuary of the hotel room for the whirlwind that awaited. "But I wanted you to know that whenever decisions you make about the farm, about the opportunities coming your way, I'm here, not just as the musician who borrowed your story, but as whatever we want this to become." Samuel found himself taken aback by how much that reassurance meant to him. Somehow, in the midst of his farm's greatest crisis, he'd found not only potential new directions for his family's legacy, but also a connection with someone who understood both his struggles and his deep-rooted being values. As they stepped into the elevator that would carry them down to the waiting media, Samuel reached for Melody's hand, intertwining his fingers with hers. No words were necessary, just a mutual acknowledgement that whatever happened next, they would face it together. 1 year later, Carter Farm was transformed almost beyond recognition, yet its essential character remained intact. The weathered red barn, now carefully restored rather than simply patched, stood as the centerpiece of the new Carter Agricultural Heritage Center, where students from surrounding counties came to learn about sustainable farming practices and the history of family agriculture in the region. Samuel moved between groups of visiting high schoolers, his teaching skills reawakened and adapted to this new context. He felt a deep satisfaction watching urban teenagers connect with the tactile reality of soil and growing things, seeing their surprise when they understood the complexity and science behind what many had dismissed as simple manual labor. "Mr. Carter," one girl called, holding up a handful of earth, "is this the right soil composition for the heritage tomatoes?" "Let's analyze it together," Samuel replied, joining her group at the testing station they'd set up in what had once been a storage shed. The eastern portion of the property still functioned as a working farm, though on a smaller scale and with a focus on organic specialty crops that commanded premium prices from the restaurant and health food markets. Samuel had hired 2 full-time employees to help manage this aspect of FIRD. The operation bright agricultural science graduates eager to learn from his experience while bringing modern sustainable farming techniques to the historic property. The farmhouse itself had been thoughtfully updated, maintaining its character while incorporating practical improvements that made it more comfortable year-round. Photos of 4 generations of Carters still lined the walls. Now, joined by newer images documenting the farm's transformation and its growing educational impact, and prominently displayed in the living room was the platinum record for Weathered Red, Melody's fastest-selling single and the Grammy winner for Song of the Year. The accompanying video, with its honest portrayal of Carter Farm and Samuel's struggle, had resonated far beyond the music world, sparking national conversations about the challenges facing family farms and the cultural importance of preserving agricultural heritage. The sound of tires on gravel drew Samuel's attention, dismissing his students for their lunch break. He made his way toward the driveway, a smile spreading across his face as he recognized Melody's car returning from her 3-week tour. Rusty raced ahead, barking excitedly as Melody emerged from the vehicle. She knelt to greet the dog with enthusiastic ear scratches before looking up to meet Samuel's gaze. "Welcome home," he said simply, extending his hand to help her up. Melody stepped into his embrace, melting against him with a contented sigh. "It's good to be back. How are things here?" "Busy," Samuel replied, keeping an arm around her shoulders as they walked toward the house. "The spring school tours are in full swing, and we just got confirmation that the Heritage Wheat Project secured its funding." "That's wonderful," Melody said, genuinely excited by the news. "And how's our favorite music classroom coming along?" Samuel smiled at her use of "our," a small but significant acknowledgement of how their lives had intertwined over the past year. Though Melody maintained her home in Nashville, she spent increasingly more time at the farm, especially when not touring or recording. What had begun as occasional visits had evolved into a deeper partnership, both personal and professional. "Almost finished," he answered. "The acoustics are perfect, according to the contractor. Should be ready for your first workshop next month." The newest addition to the Carter Agricultural Heritage Center was a music education space where Melody would teach occasional workshops connecting agricultural traditions with America's musical heritage, exploring how the rhythms of farm life, the challenges of rural existence, and the celebrations of harvest had shaped everything from folk and country to blues and rock. "I can't wait," Melody said, her excitement evident. "I've been collecting psalms and stories on the road, found some wonderful material from farming communities across the Midwest." They reached the porch, where 2 rocking chairs sat side by side overlooking the property. It had become their favorite spot for evening conversations, planning sessions, or simply watching the sunset together after busy days pursuing their intertwined but distinct passions. "I missed this view," Melody said softly, pausing to take in the landscape. "Missed you." Samuel turned to her, still sometimes amazed by the unexpected turn his life had taken. From the brink of losing everything to creating something new and meaningful from the ashes of that crisis, and finding a partner who understood both his connection to the land and his need to preserve what mattered while adapting to change. "I missed you too," he replied, drawing her closer. "The farm isn't quite the same without its musical heartbeat." Melody laughed, leaning into him. "Careful, or I'll start thinking I'm indispensable around here." "You are," Samuel said simply, "not just to me, but to what this place is becoming." The truth of this statement was evident everywhere they looked. Melody's influence had helped shape the farm's transformation in countless ways, from her foundation connections that had secured initial funding to her artistic vision that ensured the educational programs included cultural and historical dimensions, often overlooked in agricultural education. But more than that, her presence had changed Samuel himself, helping him see beyond the narrow definition of success he'd been raised with, encouraging him to imagine new possibilities for the land and legacy he'd fought so hard to preserve. As they stood together on the porch of the home his great-grandfather had built, Samuel felt a deep sense of gratitude for the storm that had brought Melody to his door that night, the pivotal moment when a struggling farmer had offered shelter to a lost musician, neither aware that they were about to change each other's lives irrevocably. "You know," Melody said, seeming to follow his train of thought, "I've been thinking about writing a follow-up to Weathered Red. Something about transformation, about finding new purpose in what you thought was ending." Samuel nodded, understanding completely. From Weathered Red to renewed purpose. "Exactly," Melody agreed, her eyes lighting up. "The second chapter of our story." Our story. The phrase resonated deeply with Samuel. What had begun as 2 separate journeys, a a farmer fighting to save his heritage, and a musician seeking to reclaim her authentic voice, had become a shared narrative, richer and more meaningful than either could have achieved alone. As the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the revitalized Carter farm, Samuel and Melody moved inside to begin preparing dinner together, their conversation flowing easily between farm business, music projects, and plans for the future, a future neither could have imagined before a thunderstorm brought them together and changed everything. In the weathered Red Barn, now standing strong against the Oklahoma sky, a new generation of visitors discovered the importance of roots, both those that anchor plants in soil and those that connect people to land, legacy, and each other. And in the farmhouse nearby, two people who had found each other at their most vulnerable points continued writing their unexpected but perfect harmony together, note by note, day by day. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the Oklahoma sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple as a gentle summer breeze rustled through the wheat fields surrounding Carter Farm. On the restored porch of the farmhouse, Samuel sat in his favorite rocking chair, a glass of lemonade in hand, watching as the day's last group of visitors made their way to their vehicles. 2 years had passed since Weathered Red had transformed both his life and Melody's. The Carter Agricultural Heritage Center had exceeded even their most optimistic projections, welcoming thousands of visitors annually and establishing itself as a model for how historic family farms could be preserved through education and innovation. Another successful day, Melody observed, emerging from the house to join him on the porch. She carried her own glass and a plate of freshly baked cookies from the farm's new teaching kitchen, another addition that had proven unexpectedly popular with visiting groups. 28 students today, Samuel confirmed with satisfaction, and the university program starts next week. 15 agricultural science majors for the summer internship. Melody settled into the chair beside his, their rhythmic rocking falling naturally into sync, a small but telling metaphor for how their lives had harmonized over time. Clara called while you were finishing up with the beret. Students. The foundation wants to feature the center in their annual report there, sending a photographer next month. Samuel nodded. No longer uncomfortable with the attention the farm received, he had come to understand that sharing their story, both the struggles and the renewal, served a purpose beyond mere publicity. It offered hope to other family farms facing similar challenges, demonstrated viable alternatives to complete corporatization of agriculture, and connected urban populations with the vital importance of understanding where their food came from. Oh, and Jack called too, Melody added with a slight smile. The Crossroads is celebrating its 20th anniversary next month. He's wondering if we might consider a special performance. Back where it all began, Samuel mused. Well, the public part of it anyway. The small venue in Riverdale had enjoyed its own renaissance, following Melody's now famous secret show. There, music lovers from across the region made pilgrimages to the spot where Melody James had launched her comeback, and up-and-coming artists coveted the opportunity to perform on its humble stage. We could debut the new song, Melody suggested, a hint of excitement in her voice. It's almost ready. The follow-up to Weathered Red had evolved over many months, through countless evenings on this very porch, with Melody working through lyrics and melodies, while Samuel offered his perspectives on the farm's transformation. Unlike the first song, which had been primarily Melody's creation inspired by Samuel's struggle, this new piece was truly collaborative, a reflection of their shared journey. I'd like that, Samuel agreed. Feels right somehow. As darkness settled over the farm, stars emerging in the clear night sky, they continued their gentle rocking, comfortable in the silence that had become as meaningful as their conversations. In the distance, lights shone from the renovated barn where a small group of local musicians gathered weekly for informal jam sessions, another unexpected development in the farm's new identity. I got a letter today, Samuel said finally, his tone thoughtful. From Laura. Melody turned slightly, curious, but not concerned. Samuel's ex-wife had moved to Colorado years ago, remarried, and maintained only sporadic contact. Oh? Everything okay? Samuel nodded. She saw the profile in that farming magazine last month. Wanted to say she was happy about how things turned out for the farm. For me. That's nice, Melody said sincerely. It is, Samuel agreed. Made me reflect on how much has changed. 3 years ago, I was certain I was going to be the carter who lost everything: the farm, my purpose, my connection to this place. He reached over to take Melody's hand. Instead, I found a new way forward. Found you. Melody squeezed his hand, her expression soft in the gathering darkness. We found each other, and we found a way to honor your family's legacy while creating something new. The truth of this was evident all around them. Carter Farm no longer looked exactly as it had for generations. Parts had been repurposed. Focus shifted. New structures added alongside the carefully preserved historic buildings. But its essence remained intact. A place where people connected with the land, where agriculture was treated with respect and understanding, where the past informed the present rather than constraining it. I have something for you, Samuel said, reaching into his pocket. Been carrying it around for a while, waiting for the right moment. Melody watched curiously as he withdrew a small worn leather pouch. What is it? Samuel carefully opened the pouch and tipped a simple gold ring into his palm. It was my grandmother's, he explained. Then my mother's. Dad gave it to me after she passed. Said it should go to someone who understood what the farm really meant. Melody's breath caught as the implication became clear. I know we've been taking things at our own pace, Samuel continued, suddenly nervous despite the comfortable intimacy they'd established. And I know your career means you'll always need to travel, to have that connection to music and audiences. I would never want to change that about you. Samuel, Melody began, her voice soft with emotion. But these past 2 years have shown me that we're better together than apart, he pressed on. What we've built here, it's not just the farm or the center or your music. It's us, together, finding harmony between our different worlds. He held out the ring, its simple design catching the last light of dusk. Melody James, would you consider making this arrangement of ours permanent? Would you marry me? Tears glistened in Melody's eyes as she looked from the ring to Samuel's face, seeing in his expression all the love, respect, and partnership they'd cultivated through seasons of change and growth. Yes, she whispered, her voice gaining strength as she repeated, yes, Samuel Carter. Nothing would make me happier than to continue this journey with you officially, completely. As he slipped the ring onto her finger, perfect fit, as if meant to be, Melody leaned forward to kiss him, sealing their promise under the vast Oklahoma sky. The same sky his ancestors had farmed under, the same land that had nearly broken him, now witnessed this new beginning. Later that evening, sitting at the kitchen table where it had all begun during a thunderstorm 3 years earlier, Melody picked up her guitar and began softly playing the new song they'd been crafting together. Its melody spoke of renewal, of finding unexpected paths, of how sometimes what appears to be an ending becomes the most beautiful beginning. Samuel listened, marveling at how a chance encounter with a stranger seeking shelter had led to this moment, to a revitalized farm, a renewed purpose, and a partnership that bridged their seemingly different worlds through shared values and mutual respect. Outside, the weathered red barn stood silhouetted against the night sky, no longer a symbol of struggle and impending loss, but a testament to resilience, adaptation, and the power of seeing possibilities where others saw only defeat. And inside, a farmer and a musician continued writing their unexpected love story, verse by verse, season by season, a harmony neither had been looking for, but both had been needing, a perfect counterpoint of roots and wings, tradition and innovation, steadfastness and creativity. As the final notes of their new song faded into the comfortable silence of the farmhouse, Samuel and Melody exchanged a look of perfect understanding. The journey that had begun with a storm, a generous offer of shelter, and a world-famous musician in disguise, had led them here to a future neither could have imagined, but both now embraced with open hearts and intertwined hands. Together, they had transformed a struggling farm into a thriving center for education and preservation. Together, they had renewed Melody's authentic voice in music. And together, They would continue writing new chapters of a story that had begun with the simple human connection between two souls, recognizing something kindred in each other, despite all apparent differences. Outside their window, the weathered red barn stood as it had for generations, a silent witness to the Carter family's evolving legacy and the unexpected love story that had saved it from becoming merely a memory.